Shalom, and welcome to Chapter 19. Chapter 18, our section on the imperative, the cohortive, and the gessive. Now, all three of these particular stems are going to translate as the demand or the command, but there's going to be nuances of differences between the three of them. With the actual imperative itself, it's the second person volitional conjugation. The cohortive is the first person volitional conjugation, and the gessive is the third person volitional conjugation. And that is basically going to, the person is going to distinguish whether it's an imperative, a cohortive, or a gessive. Now you're going to see imperatives a lot more frequently than either the gessives or the cohortatives, because I don't know the exact statistics, but I think the imperative is going to occur approximately 50 to 60% of the time, and then the cohortative and the gessive is going to make up the additional 35 to 40%. Now, with your Cal imperative strong verb paradigm, it's going to look very familiar to you. And I'll put this up here for you. There we go. This is going to be very similar to what you've seen before with your imperfect form. Its pronunciation, it's kitol, kitli, kitlu, and kitoma, and those are your pronunciations. So these are going to be the same endings that you find on in your Cal imperfects. So nothing really new to memorize there, but know these four imperative endings, because you'll see them again, and if you don't have them memorized, this is one of the few things you'll have to memorize for chapter 18. But if you fail to memorize that, it's going to get very difficult for you, because things are going to start kind of piling up on us now, and we're going to have things that prefix and things that suffix and things that change in the middle, and it will affect the way you translate and ultimately how you interpret what it is that you are translating. The Cal imperative, the form of the Cal imperative, let's read this together. The form of the Cal imperative is related to the form of the Cal imperfect. Remember the performative, consonant and vowel, from the four second person imperfect forms, and the imperative paradigm remains. The rule of schwa will apply in the 2FS and the 2MP forms. And I have this up here for you, and you can see the imperfect form there on it's going to be to my left here, the imperfect form, and then you're going to subtract the performative, and then you end up with your imperative form. So what you do, let me pull out my little dry erase board here. What you have, like this is tiktalo, and what happens to take this from being an imperfect to being an imperative, you're going to have to take off your performative, and let's just totally get rid of that. And that's going to leave you with Cthulhu. Now you've got a problem here. Remember the rule of schwa. You cannot have two schwas side by side. So what's going to happen is that that's going to change and look like this, because you can't have those those two side by side. Make sure I'm doing this right. Yeah, it's the Hirik and the schwa. So that's what it's going to look like, and that's why that's going to change. And it's just a basic rule of grammar. It's your rule of schwa, which you're already aware of. So you can see that on this form here, and I'm going to try to post these for you as well. And you can see you subtract the performative, And when you subtract the performative, then you have the imperative form. Except in the 2FS and the 2MP, everything stays the same. And because you have the two schwas side by side, that can't happen. So the first schwa drops out and becomes a heroic. Simple enough. Now, sometimes in the Cal imperative, and let's read this together, the Comet's Hey can be added to the 2MS form of the imperative. This happens 242 times in the Hebrew Bible. It's thought that the lengthened form of the imperative is either a polite or an emphatic form of the regular imperative. There you can see the Comet's Hey in each of the imperatives there. Note that the vowel in the first syllable of a lengthened imperative is Comet's Hatuf. In some verbs, the vowel is going to be a heroic. And to be honest with you, we don't know why that changes. There's a lot of theories about it, but no one knows. Sometimes in Hebrew, things just happen, and you don't know why. And again, what will always help you, you'll have your you'll have your Hebrew aids with you that will give you clues. You'll have a strong vocabulary base. You'll also, as we move on toward more translation, you'll also be able to take your Hebrew lexicon with you into your translation work, and that will also help you a great deal. Now here we have the Cal imperative, and it's prefixed with Nun Comet's Aleph. Imperatives, along with other volitional conjugations, may be followed by the particle na, and that can be with or without a makef. And it's going to be translated as please or just left untranslated. Here we have shamar na and shamar na. The only difference is the presence of the makef and the difference between the comments and the holum there. And again, we're not sure why that occurs that way either. And this is going to be translated as either observe or please observe. And when you do your translation work, I would accept either of those. Now, there's much more to say about the Cal imperative. Lots of changes with all of the various weak verbs and the biconsonantals, so on and so forth. But we're not going to stress over those, because if you'll just remember the basic paradigm for the imperative, then you'll have your Hebrew aid that you can take with you, and you'll be able to look up those. So I'm not gonna burden you with memorizing any more material. Now, for the cohortive is used to express a wish, request, or command in the first person. The unaugmented form of the cohortive is the same as the imperfect 1CS and 1CP. What identifies the volitional use of the first person imperfect is the position of the imperfect verb in its clause. When the non-consecutive imperfect 1CS or 1CP verb is in its clause, it is first in its clause, it's cohortive. When the imperfect 1CS or 1CP verb is not first in the clause, it is not cohortive but the regular imperfect. And when translating, use the words let or may. I need to see that so that I know, as you're doing your translation work, that you are understanding this concept. The position of the imperfect is very important. If it's the first, as we see here in this sentence, if it's the first, and it's in red there, if it is the first verb in the sentence, then it becomes cohortive, or it is cohortive. Let us make man in our image. But same identical words, spelling and everything. When it's not the first in the sentence, but occurs subsequent to the first word in the sentence, this is going to be translated as a regular imperfect. Everything that Yahweh has spoken, we will do. And that's how you're going to be able, because they're spelled identically to each other, that's how you're going to be able to differentiate between the cohortative and just the regular Cal imperfect verb. And here we have this next example. The first word, because it occurs first, it becomes cohortative. Let me pass through all your flocks. And then the second sentence, same identical word, but because it's not the first word in the sentence, for I will pass through your midst, it appears as a cal imperfect in that imperfect form. Both verbs are identical. The only thing that distinguishes one from the other is their position in the sentence. If it's the first word in the sentence, it's to be translated as cohortative. If it's second or subsequent, it's to be translated as an imperfect. And the good news is, with all of this, there's no new verb forms to memorize except for those imperatives that I spoke to you about earlier. The position of the verb in the clause will be the key to the translation, and there's only two Hebrew conjugations. There's perfect and imperfect. And because there's only two Hebrew conjugations, they use all kinds of different nuances to make those two conjugations do all sorts of wonderful things. And that's why these things get so detailed with performatives and suffirmatives and changes in the middle. Now, what happens when you have a cohortative and a negation? A cohortative is going to be negated with L. This construction expresses a negative wish or a milder form of a prohibition than would be expressed by lo, plus the imperfect. The particle na is sometimes attached to al with a makef. In most instances, you do not need to translate the particle na. Just remember that imperative verbs are not negated. So you can't, the do not has to be separate from the imperative, let us perish. So when you see al na, do not, and then navada, let us perish. Do not let us perish. Now, moving on to the jussive. The jussive is used to express a wish or a request or a command in the third person. In general, the form of the jussive is the same as the imperfect. What identifies the volitional use of the third person imperfect is, once again, the position of the imperfect verb in its clause. When the non-consecutive, the non-consecutive imperfect 3ms, 3fs, 3mp, or 3fp verb is first in its clause, it's a jussive. When the imperfect verb is not first in its clause, it's not jussive, but the regular imperfect. So when you translate this, use the keywords let or may so I can know that you are catching this concept. Here, our first word is it's car. Let the king remember the king Yahweh. Let the king remember Yahweh. And that's going to be a jussive. It's a command. Let the king remember. And then now you have that same identical spelling, Yitzkar, but it's not occurring as the first word in the sentence. It's now the second word in the sentence. And so now it's not going to be translated as a jussive. It's going to be translated as an imperfect. Now he will remember their iniquity. And you see the same thing happening here with Yishpat. May Yahweh judge between me and you. And so we have the jussive here. And then now Yishpat is the second word in the sentence, so it's no longer a jussive, and he will judge the world with righteousness. Well, I'm going to stop there because I think that's let me do one more. Let me do the cal negation. Just like the cohortative, the cal jussive verbs are negated with al. This construction expresses a negative wish or a milder form of prohibition than what's expressed by lo, plus the imperfect. The particle na is sometimes attached to al with a makef, and in most instances you do not need to translate the particle na. Just remember that the imperative verbs are not negated. So wa'al and not, let your anger burn against your servant. Do not let your anger burn against your servant. And so that ends the imperative, the cohortative, and the jussive. So have lots of fun working on your worksheets, and I'll look forward to meeting again with you guys next week. Have an awesome week.